It's Christmas Eve, 1944, and the world is at war. In the midst of a holiday season clouded by the horrors of World War II, an American convoy sails through the cold, unforgiving waters of the English Channel. The soldiers aboard the SS Léopoldville, a Belgian troopship that had been converted into a transport vessel, are unaware that they are about to face one of the most devastating tragedies of the war, a tragedy that would rob them of their lives just days before Christmas. If you enjoy listening to documentaries and war history, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on any new post. The soldiers aboard are a mix of young men, many of them still in their early 20s, who have already seen the horrors of combat in the European theater. They are making their way to the French port of Cherbourg, where they will join the fight to liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny. The soldiers are quiet, weary from months of fighting, but hopeful for the promise of rest and reinforcement. For many, this Christmas will be spent in the chaos of war, far from home and family, but they cling to the small comforts they have: letters from loved ones, memories of better times, and the camaraderie of their fellow soldiers. As the night wears on, the soldiers begin to settle in for what should have been a routine journey. But deep beneath the surface, the fate of Léopoldville is sealed. The German U-boats are on the prowl, lurking in the cold depths of the channel, waiting for their prey. In the distance, a shadow emerges from the darkness, its presence unknown to the unsuspecting convoy. The German submarine U-486, under command of Oberleutnant Erich Wertmann, is hunting for Allied shipping. It had been tracking the convoy for hours, and now, in the stillness of the Christmas Eve night, the predator is ready to strike. The U-486 surfaces briefly, its menacing silhouette cutting through the black water. In a swift, calculated move, it launches its deadly payload, 2 torpedoes aimed straight at the Léopoldville. The first torpedo strikes the port side of the ship with a thunderous explosion. The force of the blast sends a shock wave through the vessel, and the soldiers aboard are thrown into confusion. Before they can react, the second torpedo strikes, this time tearing into the ship's hull with catastrophic force. The Léopoldville, already crippled, begins to list heavily to the side. Chaos erupts aboard the ship. Men scream in panic as they struggle to make sense of what's happening. The soldiers, many of them barely trained in sea survival, scramble for life jackets, try to reach the lifeboats, but the ship's rapid sinking leaves them little time. Sergeant Major Henry C. Harris, a grizzled veteran of the Pacific Theater, moves through the ranks below deck. His face is lined with exhaustion, but his eyes are sharp as he surveys the soldiers. He catches sight of a group of young men sitting together, writing letters home, exchanging brief words of encouragement. They have no idea what awaits them. He doesn't either, but he's seen enough to know that the sea can be just as dangerous as the battlefield. As Harris makes his way to the deck, he looks up at the dark sky, a mixture of stars and clouds stretching across the horizon. He wonders, briefly, about his family back in the States, about the lives that continue without him, unaware of the fate he might face. It's a fleeting thought that his duties are too pressing to indulge in such musings. He moves toward the lifeboats, making sure everything is ready. Without warning, the explosion shakes the entire vessel, sending a jolt through the soldiers below. They tumble out of their seats, and the sound of metal twisting and tearing echoes throughout the ship. The vessel lurches violently to the left. The Léopoldville, now listing heavily, is struck again. The American soldiers who had once thought they were safe are thrown into a brutal reality. The ship is sinking. Panic rises like a wave as the soldiers scramble for life jackets, their minds struggling to process what's happening. The noise is deafening the shouts of men in fear, the metallic groan of the ship as it begins to tilt further into the icy waters. Sergeant Major Harris, his heart pounding, fights to maintain control. He rallies the men, shouting orders, but the water is rising quickly. Soldiers rush to the lifeboats, some managing to escape, others unable to make it in time. The cold water of the channel swarms around them as the ship plunges beneath the waves. And then the air is filled with a terrible silence. The soldiers who survive, those who manage to make it out into the freezing night, are left in the cold, dark waters, clinging to anything that floats. The sea claims its prize. In the distance, the other ships of the convoy are moving away from the sinking Léopoldville, unaware that one of their own is being claimed by the sea. Only a few of the men on board are able to get to the lifeboats. Many of the lifeboats, already overloaded, are struggling to stay afloat. The soldiers, now desperate, cling to anything they can grab, a piece of debris, a life raft, or even a hull of the sinking ship itself. The cold of the English Channel is unbearable. The water is freezing, and the men who have been thrown into it find themselves struggling not only with the exhaustion from the attack, but with the shock of the icy water seeping into their bones. Some try to swim, but the current pulls them away from the ship, and the darkness of the sea begins to claim them. "Help!" a soldier cries, his voice faint as the cold water drags him under. "Please." The cries are muffled by the roar of the waves crashing against the sinking ship. Harris, struggling to keep his bearings, fights against the current to help the men still trapped on the ship. He pulls several soldiers from the water, desperately trying to get them to safety. But for every life he saves, there are more in peril. "Get to the boats!" Harris screams again, his voice hoarse. But it's clear that some of the soldiers will not make it. By the time the last of the men reach the lifeboats, the SS Léopoldville is almost completely submerged, her dark form sinking beneath the waves. The men who survived are left floating in the icy waters of the English Channel, their fate uncertain, their numbers dwindling. Those who make it to the lifeboats are exhausted, their faces pale and etched with fear. The survivors, clinging to whatever they can find, try to stay together. But the sea is unforgiving and the cold takes its toll. Hours pass before rescue ships arrive, and by then, the damage has already been done. 763 American soldiers, men who had served their country with pride, were lost in the cold, dark sea on Christmas Eve, 1944. The horror of that night, the confusion, the chaos, the helplessness of watching the ship sink beneath them is a story that will haunt the survivors forever. The world had celebrated Christmas, but for these men, it would be a night they would never forget, a night when the sea claimed more lives than they could have ever imagined. The morning after catastrophe is still, far too still. The sounds of the sea, which have been drowned out by the screams and chaos of the sinking, are now the only noise. The survivors of Léopoldville are aboard the rescue ships, their faces haggard, their bodies exhausted. Their limbs ache, but the real pain lies deep inside, in the places they cannot reach. Sergeant Major Harris is among the survivors, though his heart feels as if it were still trapped in the sinking ship, with the soldiers he could not save. His uniform is wet and clings to him, but the cold no longer seems to matter. His eyes are hollow, staring blankly at the horizon. The icy waters have claimed so many, and he knows that he can't save them all. The survivors gather on the deck of the rescue ship. There are only a few of them, their faces pale from the cold, their eyes red from the tears they never had time to shed. The crew on the rescue ship does what they can, wrapping the soldiers in blankets, giving them warm drinks, but nothing can ease the devastation. "We lost 763, Harris mutters quietly to a fellow soldier, one of the few who had managed to survive by clinging to a life raft. 763 men, on Christmas Eve. It doesn't feel real. The soldier, whose name is David, stares at the water, as if trying to find the bodies of their fallen comrades beneath the waves. It was just supposed to be another mission, another day, another transport. Now all these men gone. The weight of the loss hangs in the air like a heavy fog, smothering any hope of recovery. There had been no warning, no chance of men to fight back or even comprehend the danger. They had been soldiers, trained for combat, but this was not a battle they could win. They were victims of fate, trapped in the cold and dark waters of the Channel, with no chance to survive. As the rescue ship sails toward safety, Harris's thoughts drift to the families of the fallen. He can already hear the letters that will be sent, the telegrams that will shatter the hearts of mothers, wives, and children across America. Missing in action, the words will read. The families will never know the full extent of what happened, never understand the brutal reality of how their loved ones died. There will be no closure for them, no final goodbye. David speaks again, his voice quiet but filled with sorrow. "Do you think the families will ever get the truth?" Harris shakes his head. "I don't know. I hope they do. But this wasn't just a battle. It was a tragedy, a mistake. And mistakes like this don't get talked about much in history books. For the next few days, the survivors are taken to safety, but their minds remain trapped in the memory of the sinking ship. They cannot erase the faces of the men they had lost, or the haunting images of soldiers still clinging to life rafts, their hands frozen from the cold. The image of the Léopoldville sinking into the depths of the channel remains burned in their minds, an image of innocence lost, of a simple transport mission turned into a deadly catastrophe. As the days go by, the reality of what they have survived begins to settle in. They are not the heroes they once imagined themselves to be. The survivors are left with nothing but the weight of their memories, the memory of men who will never come home, never be reunited with their families. The stories of their lives are left unfinished, lost in the freezing waters of the channel. The men who survived the sinking of the SS Léopoldville are alive, but they are not the same. They have been through an ordeal that has stripped away the certainty of their survival and replaced it with an unbearable weight. The weight of loss, of comrades left behind, of lives cut short. As the rescue ship makes its way back to the coast, the soldiers can hear the distant hum of the engines and the occasional clatter of the crew's movements. The ship rocks gently with the waves, but it does little to ease the tension in the survivors. They are still reeling from the shock. There are no words that can comfort them, no way to explain the loss of 763 soldiers, men who had stood shoulder to shoulder with them just hours earlier, laughing and writing letters to their loved ones. Now they're lost, their bodies swallowed by the cold sea, their stories left unfinished. Sergeant Major Harris sits in silence, wrapped in a blanket, his thoughts consumed by the faces of the men who didn't make it. He can still see the chaos of the sinking, the screams, the disorientation, the cold, and then the final silence of the ship as it plunged into the dark waters. He had fought in many battles, but this was different. This wasn't combat. This was survival against an unforgiving, uncaring force. In his mind, the faces of the men who died flashed before him. Private Edward Eddie Marks, just 19 years old, who had been sitting next to him just hours before, now lost forever. Harris had tried to pull him from the icy waters, but Eddie had been too far gone, his body already succumbing to the cold. And then there was Corporal James Jimmy Blake, a jokester who always found a way to lighten the mood, even in the darkest times. He was the first to get to the lifeboats, but never made it out in time. His body had been pulled under by the waves before he could even reach safety. Harris remembers his last words, spoken in a laugh, just moments before the torpedo struck. "If I don't make it back, tell my mama I said Merry Christmas." Now, Jimmy's family will never receive his Christmas card. They will never get the letter. He had been writing his last message to the woman who raised him. The letters that many of the soldiers had written, those final words to their families, are lost, sinking with the ship into the cold, black water. In the following days, the survivors are given medical attention, their wounds and frostbite treated. But it is the emotional scars that are hardest to heal. The war may have ended, but for them, the battle continues. Each survivor is left to cope with what they witnessed. The men they could not save, the friends they had lost, the weight of being the one who made out alive. Sergeant Mitchell, still aboard the rescue ship, takes a seat next to Harris, the two men sitting in somber silence. Neither says a word. What words could be spoken after something like this? But then Mitchell finally breaks the silence, his voice low. "Harris, do you think they'll remember them? The men we lost." Harris looks at him, eyes filled with sadness. "I don't know. History remembers battles, not the smaller stories. But I'll remember. We'll remember. That's all we can do." Mitchell nods quietly, though his mind is elsewhere. He's thinking of the families that will receive the heartbreaking news, the telegrams that will read, "Missing in action, lost at sea, no known survivors." The families won't know the full extent of what happened. They won't know the chaos, the confusion, the bravery of the men who fought to survive. They'll just know that their loved ones are gone, and they'll never have a chance to say goodbye. The soldiers aboard the rescue ships know that they will carry this burden for the rest of their lives. They will never forget the faces of their fallen comrades, the men who were just days away from completing their mission, who would never see their families again, who would never return home to the comfort of their loved ones. As the survivors disembark and are sent to recovery camps, there is no victory to celebrate. There are no medals to be awarded. There's only the quiet, painful realization that the war has claimed more than the soldiers who fought in it. It has taken the lives of those who had no chance to fight back the 763 men who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, whose names will be lost in the pages of history. But the men who survived the sinking of the SS Léopoldville know this. The true heroes are the ones who never made it to safety. The true heroes are the ones who gave everything in the service of something larger than themselves. Men like Eddie Marks, Jimmy Blake, and the others whose lives were stolen by the unforgiving sea on Christmas Eve. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten, not by the survivors who carry their memory with them, and certainly not by the families who will never see their loved ones again. The world moves on, as it always does after a tragedy. The war ends, and new stories of victory and survival begin to take center stage. But for the survivors of the Léopoldville disaster, and for the families who lost loved ones, Christmas Eve, 1944, will never fade into history. The pain of that night, the memory of the men lost in the cold, dark waters of the English Channel, remains etched in their minds forever. For the survivors, life goes on, but it is not the same. Sergeant Major Harris, along with his fellow soldiers, returns home, but he carries with him a weight that he cannot shake. The faces of the men who did not make it, their lives snuffed out before their time, haunt him. He is not alone in his grief. Many of the survivors find it impossible to return to normal life. In the month that follow, Harris and the other survivors struggle to find peace. Many of them, though physically unharmed, battle with a sense of guilt, an overwhelming feeling that they should have done more, that they should have saved more. Some of them find solace in their families. Others turn to the camaraderie of their fellow survivors. But none of them will ever be the same. They are not the only ones affected by the disaster. In the years that follow, the families of the 763 men lost on Christmas Eve struggle to come to terms with the loss. They never received the full story of what happened to their sons, brothers, and fathers. They were told the barest of details, that their loved ones had perished at sea, but they would never know exactly how they died, or the bravery that was displayed in the moments before the ship went down. For the families of those who were lost, Christmas will never be the same. Every year, they remember the absence of the men who never returned home. Mothers, wives, and children keep the memory of their loved ones alive. But the pain of loss is something that never fades. The survivors, too, struggle with how to honor their fallen comrades. There is no grand memorial at the time, no national day of remembrance for the men lost on Léopoldville. The tragedy is overshadowed by larger events of the war, by battles that defined the conflict and shaped the course of history. But for those who were there, for the families who mourned, the loss of Léopoldville is a moment frozen in time. In 1949, a memorial to the 763 men lost aboard the Léopoldville was finally dedicated in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, the home base of the 66th Infantry Division. The survivors gather there, a somber and silent group, as they pay their respects to the fallen. The names of the 763 soldiers are inscribed on the memorial, but the emotional weight of their loss cannot be captured in a single plaque. The men who survived know that no monument could ever fully convey the sacrifice made on that cold Christmas Eve. For the families of the fallen, the memorial becomes a place of both healing and remembrance. Though the men they lost are gone, the memorial stands as a testament to their sacrifice. And for the survivors who visit, it's a place where they can honor the memory of those who were with them on that ill-fated night. It is perhaps the only place where they can finally offer the last words that were never spoken. We remember you. The legacy of the SS Léopoldville disaster endures, not in the history books or the speeches of wartime leaders, but in the quiet moment of remembrance when a mother looks at the photograph of her son, a wife holds onto the last letter she received, and a soldier remembers the men he couldn't save. In these moments, the memory of those 763 men lives on, carried in the hearts of those who loved them and those who were fortunate enough to survive. Years pass, but for those who lived through the sinking of the SS Léopoldville, the memories are never far behind. For the survivors, the emotional scars from that cold Christmas Eve remain. The faces of their comrades lost to the frigid waters of the English Channel will forever be etched in their minds, haunting their every moment of peace. But in the aftermath of the war, amidst the sweeping changes in Europe and the United States, the The story of the Léopoldville disaster often fades from public consciousness. Yet for those directly affected, the loss is a constant presence. For Sergeant Major Harris, the years that follow are filled with deep reflection. He struggles to reconcile the heroism of the soldiers he saw that night, the bravery in the face of unimaginable fear, with the sense of guilt that gnaws at him for being among the few to survive. He often finds himself staring into the distance, lost in thought, thinking of Eddie Marks, of Jimmy Blake, of the faces he could never forget. He thinks of how, in those last moments, the men aboard the Léopoldville had clung to hope despite the odds, and yet for them, that hope was cruelly extinguished by the merciless cold and the depth of the sea. Years later, when Harris speaks about the event to fellow veterans, he does so not with pride, but with a heavy heart. He tells their stories of the men who never had the chance to go home, of the young soldiers who never saw another Christmas. They didn't just lose their lives, he says quietly. They lost their futures, their families, their hopes. Harris never forgets the anguish in the eyes of the families when they were given the news that their loved ones were lost at sea. The families never received the closure they needed, never had the opportunity to say goodbye. And in many ways, this unspoken grief became a shared burden between the survivors and those who mourn the fallen. The veterans who survived the disaster, although physically intact, find it difficult to move forward. For some, their marriages suffer. For others, the trauma that night follows them into their work lives, creating a barrier that keeps them from ever fully healing. They carry the weight of their memories, the faces of their fallen comrades, the chilling sounds of the ship sinking, the faces of the men they tried to save and couldn't. They question why they were spared when so many others weren't. The burden of survival weighs heavily on them, and the question of whether they truly deserve to live with the memories of those they lost never quite leaves. Despite this, there is also strength in their recollections. The survivors know that their shared experience, the bond formed in the frozen waters of the Channel, the struggle to stay alive, and the collective memory of the men who never made it gives them a purpose. They start to find ways to keep the memory of the Léopoldville alive, to ensure that those lost on Christmas Eve are never forgotten. They speak of the men and their families at reunions and at memorials, honoring them not just with words, but with continued commitment to live life with the understanding that sacrifice and bravery are not to be taken for granted. In 1949, when the memorial at Fort Devens was finally unveiled, it was not just a tribute to fallen men of the 66th Infantry Division. It was a moment for survivors to confront the ghosts of their past. They gather around the monument, reading aloud the names of their friends and comrades, those they fought alongside, laughed with, and tragically lost. The memorial is a moment of painful reflection, but it is also one of healing. The survivors, in their grief, find solidarity in one another. They are able to acknowledge their loss and, in some small way, come to terms with the fact that, while they survived, they are forever tied to the men who did not. For the families, too, the memorial serves as a point of reconciliation. For the mothers and wives who spent years waiting for answers, the knowledge that their loved ones are remembered with dignity is a comfort. The names on the plaque are more than just words. They are a tribute to the lives lost, each one a soldier, each one a hero. The families never got the closure they had hoped for, but they now have something far more enduring, a place to grieve, to honor, and to keep the memory of their fallen loved ones alive. The legacy of the Léopoldville disaster becomes woven into the larger narrative of the war. Though overshadowed by other major events, it is an indelible part of history, an example of the price of war that so often goes unrecognized. It is a reminder that while the battles of the front lines are crucial, it is the untold stories of those who perish in the unseen moments that often bear the greatest weight. As the survivors grow older, they continue to gather at reunions, some in person, some in spirit. They are no longer young soldiers, full of the energy and optimism that once defined their youth. But they are survivors, each of them carrying a piece of the Léopoldville disaster with them, and they carry it proudly. They carry it not as a burden, but as a symbol of the resilience that defines the human spirit. In the end, the memory of those lost aboard the Léopoldville lives on not just in the memorials or in the history books, but in the hearts of those who survived and in the families who never stopped loving them. As the years pass, the story of the sinking of the SS Léopoldville gradually fades from the headlines of history, overtaken by larger events of the post-war world. But for the survivors, the families of the fallen, and the men who were forever affected by that tragic Christmas Eve, the memory of the disaster remains as vivid as ever. Though history may not have given it the prominence it deserved, the events of December 24th, 1944, are forever etched in the hearts and minds of those who were there and those who lost their loved ones. The men of the 66th Infantry Division, particularly those who survived, have lived with the burden of the tragedy for decades. The names of the 763 soldiers lost that night, though often overlooked in the grand narrative of World War II, are kept alive in reunions, in the quiet moments of reflection, and in the families that carry their memory forward. In the years following the war, veterans who survived the sinking of the Léopoldville gathered for reunions, sometimes at the memorial at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, sometimes in small groups scattered across the country. Each reunion is an opportunity to share stories, to remember the men they fought alongside, and to honor the ones they lost. While many of the survivors have moved on with their lives, the bond they share, the bond formed in the freezing waters of the English Channel, is unbreakable. The men lost on Christmas Eve, who never made it to safety, live on in their memories, in their shared moments of grief, and in their dedication to ensuring the fallen are never forgotten. The families of those lost also carry the memory of the Léopoldville disaster forward. For the mothers, fathers, wives, and children of the 763 soldiers, the grief never truly dissipates. There is no closure, no final moment of peace for them, but they, too, find solace in the knowledge that their loved ones are remembered with dignity. The memorials, the annual commemorations, and the stories shared among the survivors provide them with a sense of connection, even if they were never able to say goodbye. For the broader public, the disaster remains one of the many untold tragedies of the war, one that, though tragic, symbolizes the countless sacrifices made by ordinary men during the conflict. The Léopoldville disaster serves as a reminder that war's effects reach far beyond the battlefield. It's not just about the battles fought, but about the lives lost in moments of chaos and confusion, where fate and not valor determines who survives. As decades pass, the surviving veterans grow older, many of them passing on their stories to their children and grandchildren. The tale of the Léopoldville disaster becomes a piece of their family history, passed down with pride and sorrow. They share the story not just of tragedy, but of the bravery displayed in the face of an overwhelming loss, and of the camaraderie that carried them through the darkest of times. For historians, the sinking of the Léopoldville may remain a footnote in the grand scale of World War II. But for those who lived it, it is a defining moment, one that will never be forgotten. The men who died that night are remembered not for the circumstances of their deaths, but for the lives they lived before the war and the sacrifices they made during it. The memory of those lost on Christmas Eve, 1944, is preserved in the hearts of those who survived and in the minds of those who continue to honor their service and their ultimate sacrifice. In the end, the legacy of the Léopoldville disaster isn't just about the tragic loss of life. It's about the resilience of survivors, the strength of the families left behind, and the ongoing remembrance that, despite the passage of time, the courage and sacrifice of those men will never fade. The sinking of the Léopoldville is a story of loss, but it is also a story of survival, of remembrance, and of the enduring power of human connection, though the years have softened the edges of memory. For the families of the 763 soldiers lost in the sinking of the SS Léopoldville, the passage of time has done little to erase the scars of that tragic Christmas Eve. Every year, on December 24th, the families gather in quiet remembrance, lighting candles to the sons, husbands, and fathers who never came home. The grief remains, but so does the love and the hope that their loved ones will never be forgotten. For the survivors, their memories are a constant companion. Every year, as Christmas approaches, they are reminded of the men they lost. The absence is palpable. Some of the survivors, as they grow older, begin to speak more frequently of their lost comrades. They recall the faces, the jokes, the last moments they shared with those who did not make it. The memory of the disaster, the sound of the torpedo hitting the ship, and the screams of their fellow soldiers, all of it is forever imprinted on their souls. Veterans like Sergeant Major Harris never truly leave the war behind. It stays with them in the quiet moments, in the hours when they reflect on the sacrifices made, not just by them but by the men who were lost in the icy waters. Many survivors keep in touch, attending reunions that grow smaller with each passing year. They return to the memorial at Fort Devens, standing before the engraved names of their fallen comrades, and for a moment, they allow themselves to really remember the faces that once stood beside them. For the families who had to wait, some for years, to receive the full details of the disaster, the pain is different. They never got to say goodbye, never received the closure they longed for. There was no last letter to hold on to, no final embrace to treasure. Instead, they received the cold, impersonal telegrams, the missing in action notices, the empty explanations. The truth of what happened on that night was buried beneath the layers of military bureaucracy. But as the years pass, the families begin to connect with the survivors, piecing together the stories that have been lost in the fog of war. They hear the stories of their loved ones, how they had been heroes, how they had fought with bravery in the face of certain death. These stories give the families something to hold on to, a piece of their loved ones that wasn't swallowed by the sea. As the survivors grow older, they too reflect on the legacy of the Léopoldville disaster. Many have moved on, built families, and returned to civilian life, but none of them are untouched by what they endured. It wasn't just a physical loss of their comrades that haunted them. It was a knowledge that they had survived while so many others did not. Some find solace in talking about their experiences, but others remain silent, unable to put into words what they saw and what they lost. One of the most enduring legacies of the Léopoldville disaster is the quiet, unwavering promise that the fallen soldiers will never be forgotten. The story of that night, the loss, the courage, the sorrow is passed down through generations. The children of the survivors grow up hearing about the sacrifices their fathers made, and they, in turn, tell their children the stories of the brave men who fought and died on that fateful night. In time, memorials and plaques are erected to honor the fallen. The dedication of these memorials is a bittersweet moment for the families and survivors. The names of the lost are carved in stone, and the monument stands as a permanent tribute to their sacrifice. It is a place where the families can gather, where they can share memories, where they can cry together and remember the loved ones who never came home. Though the story of the Léopoldville is not one that is often found in history books, it remains an integral part of the war's legacy for those who were touched by it. It serves as a reminder that the cost of war is not always measured in battles won or lost, but in the lives of ordinary men who are taken before their time. The men aboard the Léopoldville were not generals or celebrated heroes. They were everyday soldiers, sent into a storm that none of them had anticipated. In the end, the sinking of the SS Léopoldville is a story of loss, but it is also a story of survival. The survivors carry the memories of their fallen comrades, the faces of the men they lost in the cold, dark waters of the Channel. Their story is one of courage, not in the battlefield, but in the face of an unimaginable tragedy. The memorials, the reunions, the stories told in quiet whispers are the ways that the men and their families continue to honor the memory of those who perished. The legacy of the Léopoldville disaster endures, not just in history, but in the hearts of those who remember, in the stories that are passed from one generation to the next. The 763 men lost that night in the cold waters of the English Channel may never have the recognition they deserve in the grand scale history, but to those who knew them, who loved them, and who survived, they will never be forgotten. Their sacrifice will live on long after the war has ended, etched in the memories of all who carry their stories. If you enjoy listening to documentaries and war history, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on any new post.